Released in September 2017, Great Western Express was the first DLC in the TSW series, not counting Sandpatch Grade as that was the base game at the time. This route, in my opinion, has aged very poorly, and in this video I will be explaining why I don't recommend GWE. GWE is a partial remake of the ancient and severely outdated Great Western Mainline route in Train Simulator, which was one of the original routes in the Kuju Rail Simulator package, so it would have been made around 2006 or 2007. That original route has aged very badly, with outdated asset/track textures and the inexplicable omission of Airport Junction just west of Hayes and Harlington. The wires end abruptly in the middle of nowhere instead. But at least that route actually continued past Reading and onto Oxford. I'll mention the elephant in the room first. This route is ruined by its stupidly linear nature. We only get 36 miles of the Great Western Main Line between London Paddington and Reading. As if cutting the route at Reading wasn't baffling enough, DTG did not include any of the Thames Valley branch lines. I can understand why they left out the Heathrow Airport branch. It was most likely due to licensing issues. But the omission of the Thames Valley branches doesn't make a lick of sense, since they are also part of the Great Western Railway network, and Dovetail have clearly got a GWR license, so I wouldn't have thought it would be too much extra effort to include those extra branches plus a Class 165. The branches in question are as follows: West Ealing to Greenford, 4 km long, Slough to Windsor and Eton Central, which is 4.5 km, Maidenhead to Marlow, 11.5 km, and Twyford to Henley-on-Thames, 4 km. The Marlow branch would have been an especially interesting addition, because trains on that service have to reverse at Bourne End, thus making the driving experience a little more varied. Back in the steam era, the railway continued north of Bourne End and met the Chiltern Main Line at High Wycombe, but this section closed in 1970. How could it have been too much to ask to only add a total of 24 km in extra track? I see that the trend of DTG missing good opportunities started right at the beginning of the TSW franchise, and they have almost never cared to learn from their mistakes ever since. Exhibit A, Rhein-Ruhr-Osten, which only includes 31 km of track from Wuppertal-Steinbach to Hagen-Hauptbahnhof, with the S-Bahn branch via Gevelsberg adding another 11 km to the total route length. This route should have been merged with Ruhr-Sieg Nord, which goes from Hagen-Hauptbahnhof to Finnentrop. Another missed opportunity was to extend the route past Wuppertal-Steinbach and onto Essen-Hauptbahnhof, where it would meet the Duisburg to Bochum section, otherwise known as Hauptstrecke Rhein-Ruhr. And don't get me started on DTG's half-assed recreation of the legendary Wuppertal-Schwebebahn. That entire line should have been added in a fully drivable state, going all the way from Wuppertal-Vohwinkel to Oberbarmen, complete with an accurate depiction of the GTW-72 or GTW-15 trains. Exhibit B, Nachwerker Dresden. Although this route is fairly decent in terms of its lack of linearity, there's still a few missed opportunities here. This route doesn't include the Dresden Airport branch or an extension to Leipzig Hauptbahnhof, in which case it would theoretically be able to link up with the rapid transit route. Another thing we don't get is the correct BR143 variant for S-Bahn Dresden services, a problem that was passed on to Taranto Ramp. Exhibit C, ScotRail Express, which only includes the main line from Edinburgh Waverley to Glasgow Queen Street via Falkirk High, and omits the alternative route via Springburn and Falkirk Grahamston, as well as the lines to Alloa and Dunblane. Not helping the situation is the inclusion of only one train, in the form of the Class 385. Dovetail surveyed the London to Reading section in 2015, back when the electrification past Hayes and Harlington wasn't fully completed. That's why you'll see random catenary masts dotted about between Reading and Hayes and Harlington. Other parts of the in-game route look pretty outdated too, owing to the major redevelopments of the area in the last 8 years. For starters, West Ealing has since been rebuilt with a new entrance and bay platform, the latter being for the Greenford shuttle, as it was cut back from Paddington in 2017 in order to make way for Crossrail's Class 345 trains. Acton Main Line has also been rebuilt with a new entrance, and you also see the original Old Oak Common Depot as it was prior to its closure in 2021. These days, Crossrail have taken over most local services east of Reading, with local stations such as Hanwell and West Drayton receiving the purple branding. Of course, none of this is depicted in-game due to the chosen time period. On the motive power scene, you get a sizable amount by TSW standards, which actually isn't all that much. This pack includes the iconic Class 43 high-speed train, and Class 166 Networker in Great Western Railway colours, as well as the Class 66 diesel locomotive in EWS and DB Schenker liveries, plus the HKA and FKA freight wagons. With that selection, you have a decent amount of service variation, although it doesn't make up for the route's annoying linearity. The colouring on the HST and 166 is really strange, as it barely looks like dark green unless you get them in the right light. Most of the time, the trains look like they're painted black instead of green. The HST is used to represent fast intercity services from London Paddington to the West Country, although, in real life, they have since been replaced by the controversial Class 800 and 802 electro-diesel units, part of the Hitachi IET family. The Class 166 is used on local stopping or semi-fast services, with quite a varied stopping pattern depending on which service you choose. In real life, GWR is now using Class 387 Electrostars on local services out of Paddington, with DMUs still running on the Thames Valley branches. Crossrail Class 345 units can also be found on this section of the GWML, as their network extends all the way out to Heathrow and Reading at its western limits. I've noticed a rather frustrating trend as of late, where we never seem to get 3 brand new locomotives or units with route add-ons anymore, as seen with the incredibly disappointing core routes in the TSW4 package, and the upcoming Maintal Bahn to boot. Considering that DTG were able to include 3 new, or at least 2 new and 1 reused, locomotives with route add-ons back in the day, I don't understand why they seemingly refuse to do that anymore. And it's not just Dovetail doing this. Rivet Games have only ever included 1 form of motive power with each of their routes, with the only exception being the god-awful West Cornwall local. Despite the somewhat busy timetable, I still think this route feels lifeless and unrealistic. I say that because there are no London Underground trains shown on the section between Paddington and Westbourne Park, a part of the Hammersmith and City line that runs underneath or parallel to the GWML, and you don't see any S7 or 1992 stock units at Ealing Broadway either. In a semi-recent update, DTG did put a static set of 1972 stock at Ealing Broadway, but this isn't realistic because the 72s only run on the Bakerloo line. Reading Station, despite its sheer size, also feels rather quiet, especially without South Western Railway or cross-country services present. At the eastern end of the station you'll see platforms with third rail electrification, but the Class 450 and 458/5 EMUs are nowhere to be seen. Despite my frustration with their absence, I can kind of understand why DTG didn't add any SWR, cross-country, or London Underground AI services. Driving the HST on this route is borderline pointless. Even though you can get the thing up to her top speed of 125 miles per hour, the run is spoiled by just how short it is, and the fact that most GWR Intercity services run non-stop between Reading and London, with only a few of them stopping at Slough as well. It only takes around 25 to 30 minutes to cover the full route in the HST. There's a stupid bug with the HST power cars, where the numbers are glitched and only show 5 zeros rather than, for example, 43027 or 43187. This issue still hasn't been fixed after all these years, and as far as I'm concerned, it only goes to show just how little Dovetail really cares about making sure their loyal, and definitely not exploited, customers get a high quality product on par with Smokebox's Union Pacific 119 in TS Classic. To make matters even more disappointing, we don't get any special liveries for the HST power cars. And I think the rail scene on this route would look much nicer if we had any of the following power cars included: 43002 Sir Kenneth Grange, 43093 Old Oak Common HST Depot 1976 to 2018, 43185 Great Western, then 43187 and 43188 with Welsh Dragon emblems, plus an honourable mention in the form of 43172 Harry Patch. Hell, they could have just added the old First Great Western livery as a free update or something. As for any additional motive power, I do know about the Diesel Legends of the Great Western pack, because you know, that title's not pretentious in the slightest. This pack includes the Class 52 Western, Class 08 and Class 101 DMU in British Rail colours. But the problem with this pack is that, in addition to none of the included motive power being new to TSW, it all just looks wrong on a modern image route that has a little bit of electrification. As such, I refuse to buy this Diesel Legends pack, even though I still think the Class 52 looks good in British Rail blue. I prefer driving the Class 166 over the HST, as the increased number of station stops helps to make the journey more interesting and challenging. Speaking of stations, I like how they get closer together as you approach London, while they get further apart as you head away from London towards Reading. Compare the distance between Twyford and Reading to the distance between West Ealing and Ealing Broadway, then hopefully you'll see what I mean. The 166 originally had poor sounds, and to an extent it still does, especially considering the noticeable gap in the audio for the door closing chime that still hasn't been fixed. I always thought the horn sounded pretty bad, and it's only marginally better than the original Train Simulator version of the 166, whose sounds have aged very, very poorly. I can't comment on whether or not the prime mover sounds are accurate because I know almost nothing about the 166, but I do know that it differs from the 165 by way of a first class section, as well as all the 166s being 3-car units, while some 165s are only 2-car units. And none of the GWR 165s have first class sections. Not sure about the Chiltern units. This original version of the Class 66 has been weighed down by rubbish sounds ever since its original release in 2017. Shockingly, these were reused from the original Train Simulator Classic version of the 66, and they were already terrible back then. As unnecessary as Armstrong Powerhouse's Class 66 Enhancement Pack was, considering that they had already made a decent 66 sound pack, it does at least improve the sounds and driving experience in TS Classic. DTG would go on to reuse the EWS Class 66 in the East Coastway route, without changing the sounds, but they would finally add Armstrong Powerhouse recordings to the 66 that comes with the extended Southeastern High Speed, before rehashing the 66 yet again for the severely underwhelming Peterborough to Doncaster route. Despite that update, the GWE and ECW versions still have the crappy default sounds. One problem that has always been in the game can be found in timetable mode, where you will never see the Class 166 units coupled in pairs. The 3-car units always run solo instead. From what I can recall, this is because the devs never set up 6-car consists to appear in timetable mode. If that's true, then why they never bothered implementing those longer consists is anyone's guess, especially since you do see 166s coupled in pairs in some of the scenarios. Timetable mode includes 230 playable services for the Class 166, 98 services for the HST, and only 16 services for the Class 66. The rail scene on GWE can get very boring, especially since no locomotives or multiple units from any other add-ons have layers with playable services on this route. Besides the normal passenger runs, you can also do empty stock workings to and from Reading Train Care Depot or Old Oak Common, which service the 166 and HST respectively. The Greenford services are partially represented, but because DTG didn't bother going to the, not unreasonable, effort of adding the tiny Greenford branch, you can only drive this service as far as West Ealing. The ECS movements don't add much to the service variation, but I suppose it's better than nothing. With the more modern TSW routes, you're allowed at least 2 minutes to get your train or locomotive ready at the start of your service. This is not the case on Great Western Express, where you are expected to get the train moving immediately after the service loads in, and it's not very easy to keep to the timetable after the train or locomotive starts their journey, especially when you're running a stopping service in the 166. The Class 166 is very bland when it comes to the driving experience, especially given the lack of functionality on this older model. Her braking rate is reasonable, to an extent, but the acceleration is rather slow, even on full power. For example, one time when I was leaving Ealing Broadway on a service to Reading, the unit was only up to 50 miles per hour by the time she got to West Ealing. The only interesting part of driving on such a dull and unremarkable route, not helped by the lack of any unique scenery, is the varying stopping patterns on the local services. The distant scenery isn't very good, especially on both sides of the Warncliffe Viaduct between Hanwell and Southall. It's just a bunch of trees dotted about on a blank field, with the scenery not continuing too far past the track. There's an issue with the trees that I don't think is isolated to Great Western Express, especially since I've also seen it on S-Bahn Vorarlberg, but I thought I should still mention it here. The trees look like unconvincing paper mock-ups from even a short distance, and you can clearly see the proper details loading in when you're only about a coach length away. The poor quality distant scenery on this route is quite a visual distraction, and it lies in stark contrast to the well-modelled stations. Just east of Langley is some of the worst scenery I've ever seen in a TSW add-on. Huge fields on both sides of the track with no details whatsoever. And no, I don't consider the route's age to be a valid explanation for why the scenery is so bad. Further along the line, on both sides of Burnham Station, the buildings just look terrible because it's the same assets copied and pasted several times over. Not helping the situation is the complete lack of detail in the backyards. As I was exploring the route, I noticed too many other areas of poor scenery to mention in this video, so I'll just move on to the conclusion. Given how old this route is, and after seeing the addition of working platform information screens and destination displays on the 166, amongst a few other welcome updates, I think the only way this route could be improved now is if DTG finally added all 4 Thames Valley branch lines, which would require the addition of the Class 165 as well, both 2 and 3 car variants mind. I'm not expecting the route to be updated to be set in 2023 with 800s, 345s and 387s, and I dare say any hope or chance of an extension east of Reading is too far gone at this point. This route has always been let down by DTG's bizarre decision to cut the route coverage at Reading, of all places, and that is the main reason why I can't recommend this add-on. You'd be better off getting non-linear routes like Networker Dresden, Cathcart Circle, or even the Clinchfield Railroad.